This is my next panel in here, whom I've never met, but we are one with the universe on this. Welcome in there. So who is who on this? This is Barb.
I am Barb
Barb?
Kielhofer, Spark Foundry, data architecture team, working on clients like Starbucks, REI, Wingstop. The list gets longer every day.
Good for you. Cool. And Jess, yeah, if there's Barb and Jess, that makes you Jessica, right?
Yeah. Please, Jess. Yeah. Yep. I'm Jessica Simpson, Jess for short, to not get confused with the other less famous Jessica Simpson. And I actually sit at the center. So I run two orgs. I run our verified technology org. So that's like our marketplace intelligence organization. And then I also run our consulting org that's focused on data measurement, tech, and privacy and identity.
Wow. Okay. So you guys are doing a lot in there. So let's start out with just defining the conversation we're having. We're talking about the rise of digital ID and some of the things that are in there, and not talk about a nice small area. We can make this really concise, right? Because talk about a challenging area. You've got privacy legislation from GDPR to PIPEDA to the California, the U.S. privacy legislation it's sort of like a toothless tiger, but it's still there, and you have to deal with that. And you have to at least pay attention to it. But you got all of those things. You've got all of the stuff. You can't turn around without looking at privacy issues now in there. What's your view? If you want to talk to the audience and just say, okay, here's where I think we are right now. What would you say to them? Who wants to start?
You want to take it first, Barb?
Yeah, I mean, it changes day to day. And so everyone always asks, like, what do I need to do to prepare? And my first answer is be agile, because it's going to change tomorrow. And then tomorrow it will change again. Like, the laws are actively being rewritten constantly. Legislation is constantly coming forward or being threatened to come forward and then getting pulled back. You have personal regulations done by media companies that are constantly being changed and rewritten. So you can't take anything as you can future-proof, but your future-proofing is only going to be as good as the changes that are happening in the marketplace. So it's about staying on top of things, but then also just being able to be like water and go with the flow, because the tides will turn immediately.
Changes not only like. It changes day to day and from lawyer to lawyer too. So, and I'm not dissing lawyers, but I see all the privacy stuff, and I see all, like, you're signing the American Constitution here. You're not signing a privacy declaration anymore. But everybody's got a new story, something new. So being agile to deal with that, good. Yeah, Jessica, where are you on this in terms of where are we right now?
Well, it's kind of funny that you say that, because I was on another panel the other day, and the U.S. Constitution I was reading it somewhere or heard it somewhere. The U.S. Constitution is actually, I think, around 4,500 words, and most privacy policies from large portals actually dwarf that. So it takes a consumer more than an hour to read most privacy policies, and they're doing that on their cell phone. And then sometimes they're actually trying to get through it on their TV now, when you think about all of the other devices that they're on, or the fact that they have to go through it if they've signed up for a Peloton. I mean, think about the fact that Peloton's probably going to start showing ads soon, or the Mirror, or whatever other in-home type of IoT device there is. And so I think, the lack of regulation that we're experiencing specifically domestically in the US it's pricey. I don't think that the tech companies like Apple and Google really enjoy that either. Every new tweak to a regulation or regulation that comes out on average costs companies about $100,000 to implement, which is why you're starting to see the rise of CMPs or consent management platforms that are bringing in privacy programs and data management like Catch, so that you can look at implementing consent orchestration state by state. And I think, when you think about the privacy trends for 2022, outside of the policies that are being written by people who don't understand technology and the technologies that are being created by people who don't understand policy, you have sort of three main categories of bills, right? You've got the content moderation that ties to 230, which has been a substantial issue for platforms like Facebook and Twitter. And then you've got the data privacy laws, which are obviously very tethered to the consumer rights and the opt-in of choice, deletion of data, forget my data. And then you have how tech companies work together. So that's all about the interoperability, which ties to the antitrust stuff that's going on. And I think that's very indicative of what's happening with the CMA and what's going on with Google and Flock and Fledge and how they're just frankly back at the drawing board redesigning the privacy sandbox. So there's a lot going on, which is it's chaotic, and that's frustrating for folks. I tend to find it fascinating because one, it keeps us employed and busy, and two, I think what precedes chaos tends to be really cool innovation. It's just to Barb's point, it's like how you keep up,
Yeah, I like that the tech people and the policy people don't are in each other's worlds, but don't really yet understand them. You can introduce legislators to that too. Like if I use my iPhone, like yeah.
Well, what other law? I mean, if you think about it, like any other law that would come into space, the lawmakers are either educating themselves or they're working in lockstep with lobbyists or companies who understand these like worlds that they're in. I can't think of anything. Like if you're doing a gun safety law, you're going to work with your local law enforcement or your whatever have you to educate yourself as to how it should be written and to what steps need to be in place. It does not seem to be the case at all with these laws because they're huge, like overreaching sort of whitewashing of areas that we work in day to day that they're just like, well, we're not going to worry about that. And so you're like, well, then how do I deal with, when multiple entities are in one system, who is the controller? Just don't worry about that. It's like, these are huge things that are our day to day. And had there been consultation, it probably would be written better for the consumer, but then also better for our industry. And it just doesn't seem like that happened. There was very little interaction between the lawmakers, and that's speaking completely uneducated. It's the way they're written. That's how it comes out. I don't know who met with who and who consulted with who, but the way things are written, it seems like there was not a level of consultation happening. I
think you're probably pretty safe on that one in terms of the lack of knowledge and the influence of lobbyists. But that's the world we're in, and we I guess we could go run for Parliament or something like that. But that's probably not going to happen today for me. So we cope with it. So let's just talk about some of these issues. Jessica, before we go on to that, you said consent management platforms. Now, just because I always want to learn a new acronym, that's now a CMP. No, but that's something I'm not familiar with in terms of development, and so possibly the audience isn't as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, consent management platforms have been around to a certain extent for a while, right? So when you think about a preference manager, I mean, just think about today too, like if you go to a website and it says, do you accept these cookies? I mean, that is powered by a type of consent management platform. Or if you go in and you want to manage your email subscriptions or your text messaging subscriptions through like an airline type of platform, those are all consent management platforms. What new consent management platforms are doing is they're actually, so ones that are probably very familiar, I think, with folks there are like Big ID, TrustArc, OneTrust, those types of platforms, but they're not end-to-end solutions that actually help with just-in-time consent, privacy experiences, consent orchestration. And so what tends to happen is like, everyone's looking at the consumer and they're looking at it from a funnel-based experience and optimization, because everyone's talking about like cookie replacement solutions from a targeting perspective, but nobody's talking about like measurement and how that actually ties to first-party data and consent. So at the top of the funnel really comes consent, and comes this idea of fair trade data, where you're starting to see, especially in EMEA and even parts of Canada, if you look into like organizations like the DPPA, where they believe that people should be rewarded monetarily for their data, and the consumer becomes their own chief data officer. And so there are things like data unions and decentralized identity solutions and dApps, which kind of take on this role of DeFi that's happening in the financial markets. Where they use like data wallets and personal data vaults, what they call it. Well, how do you manage when a consumer like myself gives a piece of personal information or a pseudonymous identifier, right? So that could be whatever ID, third-party ID is available today, to one platform and not to another, or opts out of IDFA, which is Apple's tracking, but opts into Google's tracking. That gets really, really cumbersome. And if you want to provide really addictive experiences and really engaging experiences, because one of your KPIs now becomes getting more information about your customer, which is what we call data hydration, or getting net new customers, which is first party data acquisition, which is what every brand wants. You can't just have these fragmented experiences, but all of it's tied to privacy. So you have to start really thinking about what your reference architecture is from a technology standpoint, and it can't just be these paid mechanisms around DSPs and social platforms anymore. You have to start thinking about how you invest in the paid ecosystem or the owned ecosystem to inform paid. And one of the big structures that we start thinking about, in addition to identities and CDPs and clean rooms, is the CMP, but it's the next gen CMP. So it'll look at what channels, what publishers have you opted in and out of, and it will flag that on your golden record, which connects to and lives in your CDP. And then it'll actually push that information into the channel like a Facebook or a TikTok, so that platform can actually make sure they're alerted of it, and can blacklist you, and you're not, doing something litigious that you could end up on the news for. So it's really an end-to-end automated privacy solution that's providing that consent orchestration and privacy experiences, similar to how a CDP is going to provide you with like journey orchestration and such. So it's kind of like that consumer journey, but from a privacy perspective.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack just there. Let's start with the simple level, because this is something that is coming at us, and I don't know if most people know what a cookie is, or maybe they do, and we think we do. I'll just define. It's just a piece of text, and it sits there in your browser, and it has an identity, and it gets read, and then from that you can do various things with it. You can keep a session alive, so I know it's you, and I'll continue. So there's a functional piece that it does with which the internet stops working effectively. You can't remember who you're talking to. So that's one piece of it. And then there's that other piece where the third-party cookie, or at least the use of a cookie to route you for advertising, to know things about you and put those for sale. Is that a pretty fair definition? Is that, or you guys good with that? So the cookies are supposed to disappear in 2023. They keep pushing it forward, but and Apple and Google seem to be duking it out with privacy policies and different things that they're doing. So what should people be thinking about this? What should they be researching? What should they be trying to know about what's going to happen when cookies disappear or get replaced by whatever the next thing is?
I mean, my big thing is the net is a lot of this is good for us as marketers and for consumers, because there has not been a ton of innovation in the space over, I would say, the last 10 years. I think, maybe the Maid was probably the newest exciting thing way back in the day. So it's brought forth a lot of innovation, has forced us to sort of not only future-proof, but like come up with new ideas. And it was very easy to rest on our laurels and say, okay, we have technology, it works. we might change how we leverage it, we might tweak it, but we're not coming up with new solutions. And what was so exciting to me about Apple being like, or sorry, not Apple, well, Apple getting rid of maids, Google saying no more cookies, is our marketing infrastructure was like, cool, what's next? What are we doing next? And so that for me is the positive point. And that's what I try to pitch to my clients of like, this is not something to be afraid of. This is something to be excited about. And it's more tools in your toolbox. It's not that we're creating things to replace other things. These are new tools that we can utilize. So even if for whatever reason, Google was like, JK, we're not getting rid of the cookie at all, which they keep pushing back. So who knows? Yeah. There's still positive use cases for all of these tools that have come about, because for me, it wasn't a replacement of the cookie. It was new technology into our media ecosystem. So I think that's for me is utilize these things. It's not, even if the cookie's pushed back to 2025, you should be utilizing all these tools that have been created in this vacuum, because we now have amazing ways to reach our consumers. We have amazing, really one-to-one solutions that we haven't had in the past. And I think that it's important to utilize this technology regardless of privacy and regardless of changes in ID infrastructure, because, we haven't had this level of innovation in a really long time, and we've had a lot of innovation in a very short period of time. So that's all really exciting for our space.
Yeah. Can you give some examples of some of the new things that you've seen, either of you?
There's a million different. I call them all
just give me the first two.
I mean, there's unified ID, there's Flock, there's Fabric, we're going to have so many acronyms. We're not given acronyms and pithy marketing names. We're not even know what to do with ourselves. But net, they're ways of reaching your consumer. They are, a lot of them are very much one-to-one, for lack of a better term, PII based, which is, it's crazy that is more privacy compliant. But that's the way the system has worked, that's more, privacy restrictive than a cookie. But it also means that we have greater control over our consumer journey, and we have greater touch points with our consumer that we have not necessarily had in the past. There's the potential for less stitching to take place. Again, stay like water. This could change at any time, but the way the future is looking for me, I think it's a lot more consumer forward, and with the consumer having more restriction on what they want to share, they're a part of the journey. So they get to have some ownership as to what their journey looks like while we're crafting it for them.
Yeah, we're starting to hear a lot more about first-party data. And that's for the first time, and you're hearing that distinction between the first party data. What are the implications of that from your point of view?
Yeah, I think so. When you think about the solutions that are coming to market, first party data has been around. It's always sort of been like king, but you're starting to see that a lot of the net new solutions that are replacing signals like cookies and maids and IP addresses are actually derivatives of first party data. So when I think about how brands are going to go to market in the absence of traditional signals that are starting to be remediated out by either legislation or the tech companies, because Google, and frankly, the cookies have been out of the vast majority of browsers except for Chrome for a number of years. Like Apple has had them out of Safari and Firefox and some of the other independent browsers or miscellaneous browsers for a while. And so it's just, to Barb's point, we've been sort of defaulting to some lazy targeting tactics and lazy measurement tactics for a very long time. People don't like it when I say that, but it's true. And so when you think about how you're going to go to market from a targeting perspective, it's really a pyramid or a schema. So you have your one-to-one at the top, which is probably going to tap out at a 20 or 30% scale because it's going to deal on PII and authentication. but the rest of your solutions are going to be derivatives of first-party data informed targeting. So there is a lot that is going to be interdependent on machine learning and AI. There's going to be a lot that is going to be second-party data informed, which is really just publisher first-party data. So that could be clean room environments that do overlaps of client first-party data and publisher first-party data to pre-qualify inventory, pre-qualify audiences, actually sit ML or AI on top of keywords, inventory. You can look at custom algo solutions that use NLP and other types of data science that actually pull down metadata from the page and actually do ID list targeting. There's so many different flavors of contextual that aren't just your run-of-the-mill, like RTB type of taxonomy-based contextual targeting that actually use limited ID solutions. So there's a percentage of opted-in users, and I'm going to take that and extrapolate that out and use that for informed targeting. A lot of DSPs have that. Our group actually has some of those solutions, but all of that is first party informed. So you're not necessarily using attributes that are appended to an individual. You're not necessarily using an ID, but the targeting is a derivative of an ID that is then extracted with noise and math and taken out into the ecosystem. So that's why it's so critical to have the right infrastructure in place and to have the right heuristics and hygiene and hydration of your first party data, because if that's a mess and your own ecosystem is a mess, everything you do in paid is going to be a mess. Mm-hmm. And so if you haven't nailed what's going on in your own home, everything you do out here in the paid ecosystem is just going to be just destructive. And when you think about like how that all ties to measurement, which again, I think is something that a lot of people haven't really focused on because it's hard and it's going to be somewhat less scientific than before. Everything's going to be very probabilistic. It's going to be very reliant on modeling. You're going to have to lean into privacy enhancing technologies like clean rooms, like CDPs, like the cloud, right? You are going to have to think about how identity and first party data plays into you building out your own semblance of a panel. So how are you going to look at the fact, yes, you might have less volumes of first party data. How is it becoming more representative of your marketplace? How are you focusing on your consumers first? How are you building out profiles on your consumers so that you can do better conquesting and retention in the ecosystem? And so, it's a very important data point that we're focused on for our data infrastructure clients is not just how to acquire net new first party data, but how to actually really take care of what you have. So that you can do so many other things with it across the campaign cycle.
So if I'm hearing you right, the whole concept of a digital ID at all is becoming much wider and wider and wider and taking many different forms.
Oh yeah, it drives me nuts when people just think about it in terms of just to use it as like a function of programmatic. It's so much more than that. I mean, it is that, and LiveRamp has a great play in that, they can take it from identity in a safe haven or in their portrait engine CDP and take it all the way to ATS. InfoSum can do that. Epsilon can do that. So there are companies, Newstar can do that, right? So there's companies who can do that. The Trade Desk is starting to do that with Snowflake, with their media cloud. So you're starting to see how DSPs are connecting to CDPs, are connecting to the cloud environment. And that's where things get tough for media planners, because media planners and media buyers have pretty much always lived in this SSP and DSP environment. They've kind of gotten into the DMP space, right? But now all of that is moving into where CRM and sort of marketing automation marketers have lived, where they're getting into that back end own tech, where you're really driving personalization because you're starting to touch things that are tethered to PII, like identity systems, like CDP, because a CDP is really if a CRM system and a DMP had a baby, right? Clean rooms, like all that kind of stuff. So it's just a completely different way of thinking for somebody who's gone into a DSP and executed campaigns and then used an MTA system who's been built into a DSP. Because all of that pressure points have now imploded that system of thinking, and now you have to kind of shift more to the left.
Yeah, for so many years, I know with my clients specifically, we had our marketing arm, then you had their loyalty arm. They should have been talking together all along. Yep. And I think this is forcing us to take a look at things that probably should have been looked at a long time ago. So I, again, always see it as a positive, but those internal tactics and external tactics need to be lockstep now more than ever. So you do have teams that have never spoken. You know, we work for the same company and yet we've never talked to each other. And yet now you're seeing that connectivity of like, oh, we want to buy into this piece of tech. How does this affect X, Y, and Z down the funnel? Whereas you just solve disparate tactics, disparate pieces of tech, disparate ways of collecting data even that didn't talk to one another. And now you're starting to see, you know, both marketing organizations and businesses looking at their full funnel and looking at like the consumer journey from literally end to end.
Which has to have huge privacy implications. And I'm summarizing some of the questions that are coming in. I hope I'm doing a fair job of that. But, you know, people are concerned about everything but their biometrics being stored and, you know, being able to use those types of things, their digital ID being, you know, being captured. And especially when you start to link data together, even what if you strip out the identity, once you start to link data, personal identification becomes possible in new ways. So you've got huge implications in terms of not violating privacy laws, not getting yourself sued in many cases in there. So it's a big deal for marketers these days. You want to say something, Jessica? I thought. Yeah.
Well, no, go ahead and finish the question. I mean, I can kind of answer how
I'm not sure I got a really good question. I think I was just sort of being amazed by it at that point. You know?
Well, see, and I mean, that's a common misconception, right? I mean, you start getting into some of that when you're starting to talk about like health data and some of that stuff, but that's where privacy enhancing technology comes in, specifically around encryption. We don't touch that stuff and we don't want to touch that stuff. And forgive me for becoming so emboldened on this, but it drives me crazy when that gets brought up. I mean, that data never gets into our systems. Like that is where clean rooms come into place. Like the encryption methodologies that are actually employed, like privacy intersect models, homomorphic encryption, federated learning, differential privacy, all of those things are very much instituted in the technology that we work in. Everything's aggregated and federated. We're never touching row-level data when it gets to a marketing ecosystem. And furthermore, that data is never actually getting used by a brand unless you are giving it to them. And there are federal, state, and like global legislations that allow the actual like boundaries and determinations of how that data can be used. So there are policies that are being made at state and federal levels that determine, one, how sensitive data is defined and can be used, and two, how it can be shared across borders, which is SHREMS. So, you know, this is where you come back to most consumers are not reading privacy policies, so they don't know that. And they just opt in blindly because they want a 15% discount code. And then they come back and they get really frustrated because they're like, well, you have my data. Well, yes, I do, but you opted in for that. And I'm not using your PII. It's actually on an encrypted ID. And all I know is that your ID 456789, and you've opted in for a targeting use case, you know? And so that's kind of where all of these different types of technology come in for protection. But by law, we're moving from an opt-out. So by law, it used to be you were opted in until you chose to opt out. And the great part is that now in most countries, you are actually opted out until you opt in. That's not how it is in the US yet, except for in certain states like California, but very much in EMEA. I think Canada is moving towards it. And that's really great because that gives the consumer more control to say, I don't want to be part of this unless I opt in. And that's where the digital wallets are awesome, because they can say, I don't want to give you this unless I get this. And I'm only going to give you this if I get this. And so you get to decide what you want to give, who you want to give it to, when you want to give it to them, and you can delete it at any time because you have control of that digital wallet. So I would just encourage everyone to really look up and read, to the extent you can, at least a high level of those privacy policies, so you understand how your data is being used and the power that you have to actually control the deletion and rights that you have.
Wow. We're at the end of our half hour. We're just getting started. I think what I've taken away from this is that there's a lot of learning that needs to happen in this area, and it's in understanding how that fits us wherever we fit in the data analytics world that we live in there, to at least understand how we interact with this. And I think we've done everybody a service if we've at least introduced that as the concept. So thank you so much for this. This has been a great discussion, and I look forward to the second half of it at another point. But I promise you I'll read my privacy policy before.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I don't know about you. My brain's full, so I'm gonna take a little bit and network and make some jokes or something like that. So and I welcome everybody to do that. So visit the virtual booths. Go in there and say hi to the sponsors. Remember, they're paying for this, and that's a great thing for them to do. But go by and say hi to them. And I say this a lot. I've been in the IT industry for a long time. Some of the best places to get some of the best expertise is from your vendor partners, and I call them partners, not vendors. But go in and talk to them. They've got experts. Pick their brains and understand what they've got going. I think you've seen some evidence of that in here. So go do that. Drop into the roundtable chats. Get a live demo. Do a little networking, and we're going to see you back here in a half an hour. So we'll see you there at 11 a.m. Be there or be square, because we have another great, and this I was talking to people about this last night. This is going to be a great case study from Bissell. So you don't want to miss it. So go network, see a demo, and then come back at 11. See you then.